Hi all. Today we're going to be learning about topic 7, calculations involving limiting reagents. By the end of this lesson, we should be able to determine the limiting and excess reagents in a chemical reaction and use the limiting reagent to determine the amount of product generated in a chemical reaction. We're going to split today's lesson into two parts. First, starting off with when we're given the amounts of moles, and then in part 2, we're going to be dealing when we're given the amount of reactants in mass, in grams. If you're given the quantities of two different reactants, you first have to figure out which one is the limiting reagent. Once you know the limiting reagent, you can then use this amount to predict what amount of the product will be produced. And it'll be a basic stoichiometry problem from that point on. Now, to try to figure this out, let's try to work through a sample problem. So in this question, it asks, determine the amount of titanium metal produced when 2.8 moles of titanium 4 chloride reacts with 5.4 moles of magnesium. And we're given a balanced equation showing TiCl4 plus 2Mg yields titanium and 2MgCl2. Okay. Like any problem, we're going to break this down using modified graphs. And our first step is to rewrite the balanced equation and writing out the information that we're given. So if we look here, as you know, you can see we're given our balanced equation. So rewrote that over here. And then from there, we're setting up our chart where we have our moles. And we're told in the question that we have 2.8 moles of titanium chloride and 5.4 moles of magnesium. And we're trying to figure out how much titanium will be produced in this reaction. Now, unlike previous stoichiometry problems, we were only given in the past only the amounts of one of the reactants, and then asked to go through to solve how much of another reactant we might need, or how much product would be generated. But now, since we're given the amounts of two of the reactants, we need to figure out which one is limiting, because it's the limiting reagent that's going to tell us exactly how much product will be generated. Okay, so now what we're going to try to do is try to figure out how we can try to determine which one of these two reagents, titanium chloride or magnesium, are the limiting reagent. And you're going to see that the way we go through it, it doesn't matter which one we pick. We'll get the same answer, and we'll try to work through both scenarios. Okay. So under step 2, it says determining the limiting reagent. First, use the amount of one of the reactants to find the stoichiometric amount of the other. And like I said earlier, it will not matter which one we choose. Okay, so we're going to start off and we're going to start trying to convert the amount of magnesium we have into an amount of titanium chloride. Okay, so what I'm basically trying to say is to say, okay, if we have 5.4 moles of magnesium, how much titanium chloride would we need to react with it? Okay, and then we're going to compare the amount that we actually need to react with all of the magnesium and the amount of titanium chloride that we actually have, which is 2.8 moles. So to do this, we're setting up a basic stoichiometry problem. Okay, so in here, we got to look at our mole ratios between titanium chloride and magnesium. And according to our balanced equation, we have a mole ratio of 1 mole titanium chloride to 2 moles of magnesium. And we're trying to solve for the amount of titanium chloride that we need. So we have 5.4 moles of magnesium. So we're going to multiply by 1 mole titanium chloride divided by 2 moles of magnesium. And that'll allow the magnesium to cancel out and give us 2.7 moles of titanium chloride. So this is no different from any mole ratio problem. Okay, but now what we need to do is to try to compare the amount of titanium chloride that we need with the amount of titanium chloride that we actually have during this experiment. And if you notice, this here is the amount that we need. Excuse my writing. This one here is the amount that we actually have. Now, when you look at the two numbers, what do you notice? We have more titanium chloride in this experiment than we actually need, which means that titanium chloride is going to be our excess reagent and magnesium is going to be our limiting reagent. Now, we're going to need to put in a statement to communicate that. Okay, so if we look here, in this experiment, we would need 2.7 moles of titanium chloride to completely react with all of the magnesium that we have. However, we have 2.8 moles of titanium chloride. Therefore, we have more titanium chloride than we need, making TiCl4 the excess reagent and magnesium the limiting reagent. So anytime we're doing a limiting reagent problem, we're going to have to identify what the limiting reagent is. And we're going to use this strategy where we're going to choose one of the reagents and figure out how much of the other one we would need. And we're going to compare with what we have. And then we're going to be expected to write a therefore statement to try to explain it, very similar to what I have written down over here. And once we know the limiting reagent, oops, sorry about that. We can use the limiting reagent, which in this case was magnesium, to solve for the amount of titanium, which we're going to do now. Okay, so now we know here that, let me see. Magnesium is our limiting reagent. Okay, so we're going to use that amount to figure out how much product is going to be generated, because in an experiment, the limiting reagent is completely used up. So it will determine the amount of product generated. And to work our way across a balanced equation, we're using mole ratios. And looking at this, our mole ratio is 2 moles of magnesium to 1 mole of titanium. Okay, so from here, we're solving for our moles of titanium. We have 5.4 moles of magnesium. And remember, that was our limiting reagent. So we're using that to determine the amount of titanium. And we're multiplying by 1 mole of titanium. Titanium's on the top because that's what we want. And then 2 moles of magnesium is on the bottom because that's what we actually have. And we get 2.7 moles of titanium. So in this experiment, if we have 2.8 moles of titanium chloride and 5.4 moles of magnesium that are reacted together, we will produce 2.7 moles of titanium. And magnesium is the limiting reagent, and titanium chloride is the excess reagent. Now, at the beginning, we said that it doesn't matter which reagent you choose to try to figure out who the limiting reagent is. In the initial part of the problem, we went and asked the question and said, okay, if we have 5.4 moles of magnesium, how much titanium chloride would we need? Now, we could do it the opposite way and say, okay, if we have 2.8 moles of titanium chloride, how much magnesium would we need? And to do that, we know we have a 2 to 1 mole ratio. So from here, we're trying to solve for the amount of magnesium that we need. So we're taking 2.8 moles of titanium chloride, multiplying by 2 moles of magnesium over 1 mole of titanium chloride, and we get 5.6 moles of magnesium. Now, this 5.6 moles is the amount that we need. In here, if we look at this over here, 5.4 moles, this is the amount that we actually have in this experiment. What do you notice about the numbers? In this experiment, we do not have enough magnesium to fully react. Right? We would need 5.6 moles of magnesium to react with all of the titanium chloride that we have. But in this scenario, we only have 5.4 moles of magnesium, which means that magnesium is the limiting reagent. And we get to the same conclusion that we had when we tried it the original way. So from here, we'd be asked to try to communicate this. Oops, sorry about that. So in this experiment, we would need 5.6 moles of magnesium to completely react with all of the titanium chloride we have. However, we only have 5.4 moles of magnesium. Therefore, we do not have enough magnesium to completely react with the titanium chloride, making TiCl4 the excess reagent and Mg the limiting reagent, the exact same conclusion that we reached the first time. That's it for today's lesson, trying to identify the limiting reagent and using that to identify the amount of product that's generated. You'll have a few questions for homework to practice doing these calculations, and when we go through our next live lesson, we will review this and go through the questions in detail. In the next lesson, we're going to be going through where instead of being given amounts of reactants, we're going to be given the masses. And then we're going to have to go through and do a similar idea where we're going to have to solve for moles first and then identify the limiting reagent. I hope you found this helpful, and try your best with the homework. And if you have any questions, post them on the EDSV feed, and we will go through them in detail during our next class.